afford some of your time to meet with the Sparkability team and hear their proposals. They have a fantastic model of care that could be used nationwide to help families and children, and I will write to you with their details if that's okay with you. Thank you.
Thanks. Dr. Duffy. Now, Deputy Catherine Connolly, please.
And thank you to the Minister, and thank you for your comprehensive opening statement. But as is often the case with opening statements for ministers, it's no context given to it. I welcome your commitment, I welcome your bona fides, I welcome the positive steps that you've outlined. But to understand that, one must put it in context. And you point out it's their right under the Constitution, and nobody in the Chamber disagrees with that. I would call that weak in the extreme. There is an obligation under the Constitution, you know more than I do, 42 for primary school. It doesn't depend on ability. Unfortunately, going back to the 90s and the O'Donoghue case, the government sought to argue that some children were not educable. Unfortunately, we've moved a long way from that. But that's the background here, and I'm going to come back to that in relation to the July provision. So we're talking about rights here. And so the context of this discussion is not proactive. It's not because the National Council for Special Education came forward and said we have a crisis, we have no places in September. It was as a result of committed organisations on the ground coming forward and the media telling us that there's a problem here. And so we have a response to that through Twitter, which I must say, and tweets. I don't think it's an acceptable way to convey policy, Minister, but that's just me personally. I don't think it's the right way to do things. Policy should be conveyed on the floor of the Dáil. And so we had tweets going out in relation to this, that the legislation might be changed, that the legislation that's there might be enacted, and that we might set up special education centres, which caused an absolute outcry, quite predictably. And let me just see, in terms of Garrett Noble, solicitor who specialises in children's rights, pointed out education isn't a luxury or a privilege, it's a constitutionally enshrined privilege. We know that. Anya Hyland, Professor Emeritus of Education at UCC, says the shortage of special places at second level in particular is entirely predictable. As I am pointed out, their shock at the proposal in relation to special education centres. And more particularly, Harris pointed out that a fundamental change in culture is needed, fundamental change in culture. And he says a deeply rooted charity-based approach is what's the problem. Charity-based, not constitutional-based. And so I would have a lot more faith in the system if this was a proactive discussion brought forward by the government in an open and accountable way to say we have a major problem here. Notwithstanding the amount of money, 2-point-something billion, I welcome that. Notwithstanding the eligibility for the July programme, which I'll come back to, and so on. But I would expect, at the very least, that when a speech is made like that, it's placed in context so that we understand it. At the end of the day, from your speech, we're talking about a very finite number of children, aren't we? Finite. Overall, there are almost 12,700 pupils. Finite number. Approximately 1% of the overall population, that's all we're talking about, enrolled in special classes in mainstream primary and post-primary schools. On the next page you tell us there are now 129 special schools, and that percentage of 8,000 pupils is 0.8% of the total population. So here we have finite numbers, finite challenges. I don't like to call it a problem, because in fact, I think all our effort should be going in to help those with disability in the first place, then national schools, and last of all, third level, in my opinion, notwithstanding that I fully recognise the important role of third level education, but I would put it in at the other end. So we have this finite number and this finite challenge, and yet this is a reactive discussion where you're obliged to come in and say, I did this, we did this, we did this. And all of the while, we have approximately, I could say 250 to 270 children with no place in the autumn. Now, that's completely unacceptable if we're taking our obligations under the Constitution seriously. And I welcome the fact that you've placed a new CEO, but there's no analysis of what led to this problem. What led to you appointing a new CEO? What analysis has been done without blaming anybody? What happened that they couldn't predict and bring it to the Minister's attention so that we could have a proactive discussion and look at it? That hasn't happened. And then, as I said, the changes proposed were ad hoc and positively dangerous, really, and unacceptable, by saying we'll have special education centres and so on. This... The Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission responded with immediate concerns about the plan, pointed out that young people have a right to education and for that education to be an appropriate education which meets their needs. Under Article 24 of the UN CRPD, persons with disabilities are not... Imagine having to read this out. I mean, we've signed up to the UN, we signed the UN Convention, we finally ratified it in 2018. We didn't, of course, sign up to the protocol yet. And various organisations on the ground have to come forward and point out that they're truly shocked. Adam Harris, as I am, truly shocked by the plan which will see or mean the segregation of autistic children from their peers. And he estimates that there are at least 267 children across the country who have been unable to find a suitable place for this coming September. So when I looked at all of this, Minister, and when you're coming near the end of a discussion, you have a chance to read your speech and that. And, you know, I actually said to the staff that are working with me, you know, this is such a positive contribution. Why is there a problem? There's a 2-point-something billion. What's going on here? What's going on? And clearly, what we're saying to those people, 267, you know what? We've done brilliantly with everybody else, and your time will come. Your time will come some stage in the future. So let me just read out for the actual effect on somebody when their time is to come in the future. You know, it's actually too upsetting to read out somebody writing to TDs and telling them about their child doubly incontinent, hearing and speech difficulties, absolutely reliant on education and absolutely reliant on the July provision, or the summer provision as it's now called. And I don't really want to do it. But that's the level that we're at in our offices with TDs telling us. And we match that then with your lovely speech and all the positive things. And you say, gee, am I going to be negative again today? Or what is the problem here? And I think the problem is a lack of openness and accountability in relation to the procedure that's there. What happened, how can we change it, and how can we improve it? In the last 2.5 minutes, I just want to look at summer provision, Minister, and you may recall, and thank you for giving me the review. And you may recall I raised this as a topical issue, again, because parents are at their wits' end. And again, the summer provision, which was the July provision, was consequent on a High Court case back in the 90s, O'Donoghue versus the Department of Education. And we got minor changes in 2001. It took up to 2001. I wasn't able to establish precisely when the case started, but it was all through the 90s. They were put to their pin of their collar, that family, and finally a limited July provision was brought in, specifically in relation to the children with special needs who are utterly dependent on July provision. And I raised it as a topical issue, and I've got the review. And I have to tell you, this review, you might clarify for me, there was a review to be done in 2019. Is that review, a comprehensive review, still underway? Or did it metamorphose into this review, the inspectorate report, which is anything but analytical? Talks about the majority of parents, some parents, tells us that the July provision is very good. No analysis whatsoever of the vast amount of people, families, who can't avail of the July provision because the vast amount of schools aren't participating. And again, I won't embarrass a school in Galway, but it's a special school. They're not doing the July provision. Again, I have a letter there, woman at her wit's end. And do you know what that school is doing with their premises? They're renting it for the summer. They're renting their gym. They're renting whatever facilities they have because they, according to them, need money. Clearly they're not being funded enough, but the July provision. So what I'm asking you in my last minute is please have a complete, comprehensive, factual analysis of the summer provision. How it changed, I welcome that it changed in the sense of widening out the eligibility. However, to my knowledge, that's to the detriment of the very children and families that it was set up to support. And the numbers are absolutely tiny. I don't have the time to go into them, but they're absolutely tiny. I welcome the changes that you made in relation to teachers and special needs and the advantages for them if they take part. But there's a far more fundamental problem, that this is voluntary, that only a tiny percentage of those with special needs can avail of it, and when they do, they only get a week or two. And there's absolutely no clarification about home provision. It's being put in as a saviour. It's not suitable at all. People are resorting to respite services which aren't there to get a break. They have begged that special school in Galway, we will run it ourselves. They actually said, the parents said, we'll run it ourselves to give us a break. So I welcome the discussion. I would hope that at some stage we'd have a proactive discussion where we analyse the problem and you come back and tell us the solutions within a very specific period of time. Not telling us that some stage in the future this piece of an act will finally be implemented or this one will be changed. There's a constitutional obligation on you and on the government to provide education. Your mug.